Did you know that 30% of the people in the town of Valentine in Red Dead Redemption 2 have at least one tooth missing? You want to know how I know that? Because I conducted a census. Sort of. It turns out that conducting a census, which is like a giant survey where you try to figure out who lives in a town and what their lives are like, is kind of complicated in a video game where you've got over 100 unnamed NPCs that respawn every morning and don't tell you anything about who they are or what they do. In real life, you literally just go up to people, give them a sheet with questions, and then they fill it out using their human brains. But video game characters don't have human brains, which means they definitely can't fill out surveys. So I need to figure out a way that we can get some type of survey information from these NPCs without using normal survey tools. For a real census, we would have lots of hyper-specific questions, like what kind of housing everyone lives in, how old each member of the family is, whether they have internet access, and so on. But in a video game, a lot of these questions don't make sense and would be impossible to answer. So I decided to focus on the big, broad things you would see on a real census, but simplified down to what's actually visible and inferable in a video game, which means we're really going to look at 5 things. Number 1, employment status. We're going to figure out if each person has a job or not and sort them into unemployed or employed. Number 2, employment industry. So if someone is employed, what industry are they employed in? Number 3, we'll look at their income level. So based on their job as well as what they're wearing and where they're located, we're going to make a guess as to what their income level is. Number 4, age. This one should be pretty easy, but rather than a specific age, we're just going to sort everyone here into 3 categories: children, adults, and old. Lastly, number 5, health. We are going to try and determine how healthy all of these people are based solely on what they're doing and how they look. We'll get into the details of the criteria for each category as we go, but for now, these 5 questions are going to serve as our census. As I alluded to in the intro, Red Dead Redemption 2 NPCs are kind of divided into 2 types. You've got static NPCs with names like bank teller, bartender, sheriff, or store owner, and these people can be found in the same place day after day. And then you've got unnamed NPCs called strangers who wander around and do all sorts of funny random things. The second group, those strangers, is obviously going to be much harder to survey, so let's start with the first group. The first guy that I tried to survey upon entering the town of Valentine was the sheriff, because I figured that he would be amenable to assisting someone on official government business with an important bureaucratic task. But I was wrong about that.
Okay, move yourself along. No fuss now.
Would you relax?
Right.
Relax. You guys are shooting a government worker. It's not good. I'm going to talk to FDR about this, or whoever. Who's president? Woodrow Wilson?
The good news is that we don't have to get too close to people to determine what kind of job they have, especially when it literally says sheriff in their name. So this guy, definitely employed. Most of the other named NPCs are in hospitality and food service, with 2 employed bartenders, a hotel front desk worker, and a lady who will give you a bath at the hotel if you want. And then you've got your standard Old West positions like a town doctor, a banker, a general store owner, and a gun store owner. Add in a few other weirdos like this guy who has some kind of movie theater, and you end up with a chart that makes it look like a fairly diverse economy with lots of people working many different jobs, like a cute little hippie commune or something. But this place is not a hippie commune. You saw what that sheriff did to me. And in fact, when we survey all of those unnamed NPCs I told you about, this graph is going to go from looking like this to looking like this, with over half of the jobs in the city taken up by one industry. Any guesses what that industry might be? Well, let's wrap up this survey and then we'll go figure that out right after I tell you about the savior of my life, Factor meal delivery service. Welcome to the sponsorship. Here's the thing about Factor. Factor is a service with a purpose, and it fulfills that purpose if you use that service, which is that they send you freshly made meals in little boxes that you can heat up and eat very quickly. It's not here to replace cooking if you want to cook. It's not pretending to be Michelin star quality food, cooked by Gordon Ramsay, but it's a highly convenient, tasty way to get full meals in a way that minimizes the effort you have to put into cooking or deciding what to cook. They send you meals in a box, you throw them in a microwave or cook them in a pan like me, and in a few minutes you're eating a solid meal that fits your dietary preferences without having to put in any effort, which obviously I love. I don't know if you guys have been appreciating the light speed that I've been putting on my videos lately, but guess what? I can't do that if I have to cook all my meals from scratch 2 or 3 times a day. That's just simple math. And listen, I like cooking my meals from scratch. Fresh ingredients are great. Go to a farmer's market. We love those. But if your life right now is too busy, too exhausting, or you'd just rather spend time doing other things things than cooking, Factor is a pretty great option. They've got low-carb meals, high-protein meals, vegetarian meals, all sorts of options to suit whatever your food preferences are. And if you find yourself eager to cook from scratch again, it's no problem. You can just pause or cancel your subscription without issue and then restart it whenever you want it again, which is what I do. Unless they're sending me a free box when I'm doing a sponsorship. But if they're not sending me a free box, that's what I do. Head to factor75.com or click the link below and use code AnyAustinFB50 to get 50% off your first Factor box plus free breakfast for 1 year. That's code AnyAustinFB50. I learned, somebody pointed out, yes, the last time we did one of these, I said I thought FB. I didn't know what FB stood for, so I said maybe it stood for Someone pointed out it probably stands for free breakfast. That is factor75.com or click the link below, AnyAustinFB50 for 50% off plus FB for 1 year. Now, let's talk about how much money we think all these people in Valentine are making, shall we? The average American household income in 1907, which is the year that our survey takes place, was around $700. And yes, that is $700 annually, which, adjusted for inflation, is equal to about $50,000 of buying power today, which is lower than the median income in America now, but really not nearly as bad as I would have expected. Based on that, let's try to estimate what some of our named NPCs might be making in a year. When we look at someone like this small town doctor, he was probably making significantly more than the median income, maybe something like $2,000 per year, which would put him in the upper class of people in this area. Congratulations to you, sir. But the rest of our workers probably aren't so lucky. This bank clerk might be doing slightly better than bad, but he's likely making around $700 a year at most, right around the national median. This hotel owner might be a little better off since he seems to own this hotel, but probably no more than about $800 per year. And then the rest of these folks, the bartenders, the bath attendant, the shopkeepers, etc., are probably all making no more than $600 per year, probably less. Which means our income spread of the named NPCs looks like this. Most of them are solidly working class, and then the doctor is the only person who we might consider truly upper class. But we do have a lot more people to survey. Let's move on to age, and unsurprisingly, all of the named NPCs are going to fall squarely in the adult category. It's a little bit of selection bias because we are specifically only doing people right now that have notable roles in the town, and those people are going to be definitionally employed and of age. And then lastly, maybe the most interesting question we have to cover here is health. Coming up with a criteria to judge health based off of nothing but looking at somebody is, of course, a little tricky. So when I first was doing it, I just started out by kind of vibing it out, you know? Well, he's a little red around the nose. His skin's definitely looks a little worse for wear. This is so mean. He's leaning. He doesn't have the small muscles in his back are not supporting him. You know, he's obviously tired. A little grime under the, little dirt around the hands, so he's not washing his hands enough. And for the most part, that seemed doable, especially once I got the hang of kind of what I was looking for. Things like whether people had clean hands or redness in the face or how their posture was, these aren't going to tell us anything about underlying conditions they might have, but, and I say this as someone with bad posture, they do indicate something about somebody's overall health, at least probabilistically. How's his health? We're going to assume good because he's a doctor. Hands absolutely pristine. Look at that. His skin's looking pretty rough. He looks tired as heck. He's nodding. He agrees, actually. However, I had a revelation upon examining my 6th NPC, and this was crazy to me. Every character in this game, all these people have unique teeth. Wait. How many teeth are missing? He's missing one tooth in the front. This is crazy. He's got some plaque buildup in the back. Holy cow, I can't believe we can tell. This is crazy. What are these game developers doing? His wisdom teeth kind of came in funny back there. I don't know. Can a dentist count these teeth and tell me if he has a normal amount of teeth? I can see his uvula. I'm still kind of in awe of this because I inspected lots of NPCs, well over 100 by the time this survey is fully completed. And there were easily more than 10 unique sets of teeth, if not more, across these characters, including different amounts of remaining wisdom teeth for different people, different levels of decay or plaque buildup, and different teeth missing from different people. It's legitimately insane that they did this. Like, they must have had a dedicated dental modeling supervisor working there. Hopefully that wasn't one of those people they fired the other week. If it was, you better bring them back. We need realistic teeth in GTA 6. Anyway, Teeth end up being a great indicator of overall health, and once I was able to add that into my formula, it was surprisingly easy to map it all out. I ended up considering anyone with no obvious defects to be in good health, 2 or fewer defects was fine health, and more than that was considered poor health. So about half of the named NPCs that we surveyed are in fine health, with the other half split just about evenly between good and poor, which honestly seems pretty good for 1907. So with that, we have all of our data from all of the named NPCs in Valentine. Now let's talk everyone else. So like I said, the problem with everyone else in Valentine is that they are not persistent, meaning they don't have names, which is going to be very annoying, and you can't talk to them at all, which is going to be even more annoying, but they also don't even exist across multiple days. Look at these photos I took of these same 2 buildings from one day to the next. All the same slots are filled, but they're filled by totally different NPCs. So how can we possibly survey these constantly changing people? Well, I wasn't sure quite yet, but I knew that the first thing I needed to do was figure out how many of these NPCs there are in total, roughly, at any given time. I did 5 separate frantic runs around the city at peak times of day to try and count them as quickly and loosely as I could, and then I took the average of that number because I figured sometimes I would miss some people or double count some people, and I ended up with roughly 100 unnamed NPC slots at any given time in Valentine. I'm sure this isn't quite right, but it'll be close enough for our purposes. So great, right? Now we just have to go do 100 surveys of all these people and we're done. Easy. If only it was that simple. The problem is that even though there are 100 of these people present at any given time, the game is randomly filling in these 100 NPC slots from a mysterious pool of possible NPCs, which is why they change from day to day. And we don't really know anything about this mysterious pool. It could contain hundreds of possible characters that the game picks from, or just a few dozen. But that mysterious pool is really what we're trying to survey. So, can we do that? I think so, but we can't do it using a direct survey like we did before. We're gonna have to get more creative. So what I decided to do is pretty simple if you think about it, but it's sort of genius. I divided the town of Valentine into a perfect impartial grid and labeled all of the squares. Then I paired all of those grid spaces with 8 different time slots throughout the day that I felt would represent the spread of different NPC layouts that the town might have in a normal 24-hour period. After that, I used a random selecting tool to pick out 25 combinations of times and locations, and then I used those combinations of times and locations to conduct surveys of any NPCs within those grid squares at those times. By spreading the surveys out like this and taking lots of random samples, I wasn't counting the same types of people over and over. I was getting a real mix of whoever happened to be in town at that moment. And once you combine all those tiny snapshots together, you can actually build a pretty accurate picture of what Valentine looks like on a normal day, even if the NPCs themselves are always changing or moving around. So I spent an entire real-life day running back and forth across the grid in Valentine, surveying people as quickly and efficiently as possible within the times that were selected, gathering all of that data in a spreadsheet so we could analyze it later and draw conclusions about it. Now, full disclosure, I tried to make it sound like I came up with this survey method myself because I wanted to build mystique around my creative genius, but this is actually a very well-established method of doing surveys called time location sampling. It's basically the same methodology that real-world researchers use when they can't track every single person in a given population. They sample times and locations and then let probability do the rest of the work. I discovered a lot of awesome details about Red Dead Redemption 2 from this portion of the survey because we had to use a lot more context clues to determine employment and income level, so let me share with you some of those observations now. First up, check out these pink things tied around this guy's knees. These are called knee wraps, and they're often worn by people who worked in ranching or herding to prevent their pants from riding up and exposing their legs or knees to cuts and scrapes, because they'd always be walking through stuff that scrapes them. And it also helps their pants last longer because the wrapping would get scraped up when you kneel down rather than the pants themselves getting scraped up at the knee. This one small detail was enough for me to conclude that this guy was probably employed, likely as a ranch hand or cattle driver, meaning he likely makes working class levels of money, and a quick look at his teeth shows us that he's missing one but otherwise in fine health. Another great detail was this guy standing on the porch of this house. We assume that he owns this house, meaning he's fairly well off and he's relatively well dressed with good teeth and clean hands. But how did he get his money to buy the house? Well, in his backyard, we can find 2 big old sacks of army payroll. It's probably obvious, but having giant sacks of cash meant to pay military servicemen sitting in your backyard probably means you're up to no good. Ergo, we determined that this guy is probably a white-collar criminal, which may be a little naughty of him, but it does still count as employment. There are lots of great details in the characters and environments like this in Red Dead Redemption 2, but the real question is whether or not those details were enough for us to build a full assessment of the demographics here in Valentine, and whether or not those demographics are accurate to history. So let's take a look at the results, shall we? Compiling all the results ended up taking a bit of time because, as you might have guessed, when we did our time location sampling, we weren't actually counting specific people, but rather the overall proportion of people in a given group. So I had to take the results of that study, apply those proportions to the unnamed 100 NPCs that we estimated existed at any given time from earlier, and then add that number to our initial count of the named NPCs. But I got it done, I built my pie charts, and I officially have some fascinating results for you about the way people in Valentine are living. Starting with age. Okay, this one's not that interesting, but all the people here are adults with only a few elderly people and 0 children. Rockstar games generally don't have children in them for obvious reasons, so it's no surprise that there are none here as well. But in a real frontier town like this, you would definitely have children running around, especially for the named NPC type people who clearly live here and work here over the longer term. Something very strange would have to be happening here for there not to be any kids at all. Next up, let's talk employment. Almost everyone in Valentine is employed here. 90% of people have jobs, 5% are unemployed, and 5% are not applicable, meaning that the town overall has an unemployment rate of 4.5%. What exactly does an unemployed person look like in Red Dead 2, you might ask? Well, here's a guy who spends the entire day in a bar, not drinking, and stabbing himself with a knife, so I would say that that seems pretty unemployed, especially if you can't even afford to buy a drink. Everybody in this game drinks. Everybody in America drank, I guess, at that time. Now, a few interesting aspects of the employment situation here. First of all, there are very few not applicable people in our survey, meaning we didn't really see many stay-at-home parents, which back then would usually be a mom. This is both unrealistic, but also very different from pretty much every other unemployment survey we've done in a video game. The one caveat here is that the houses themselves generally aren't enterable, so we could infer that maybe each house has at least one person staying at home taking care of the non-existent children or whatever, but we didn't see those people, so they don't count for the survey. Additionally, the real-life unemployment rate wasn't really calculated until after the Great Depression, meaning a real-life point of comparison here probably isn't going to be super accurate, but there is a historian named Stanley Lurban, who estimated that the annual average unemployment rate in 1907 was probably around 1.8% countrywide. It was obviously a completely different economy at that time, but this is a lot lower than we're seeing in Red Dead 2, even if 4.5% isn't super crazy. Next up, employment industries. In terms of industries, the final graph looks a lot different from the initial one, so let's do a quick comparison. The graph, when we only included the named NPCs, was dominated by hospitality and retail, but after adding in the 100 or so unnamed NPCs, basically every industry pales in comparison to the #1 industry in Valentine, which is, drumroll please, agriculture. Over 50% of the town works in some sort of agriculture or agriculture adjacent industry, which makes a lot of sense given that nearly half of the area of the town is made up of a huge livestock auction house, and lots of properties also have their own small livestock farms. The way we figured this out was twofold. Firstly, lots of NPCs were just actively on the farm working, so that's easy to deduce. But there were also NPCs we found around town, especially around lunchtime, who were very clearly dressed for ranch work but just weren't actively doing it. Their clothes were dirty, their faces were dirty, they had pistols and knee wraps on. There weren't any other good options for what they might be doing. The other big chunk here is entertainment, which may look surprising at first, but I decided to include sex work as entertainment, and there's a good gaggle of gals who all work in the saloon at night doing just that. The only non-sex worker entertainers are the guy who works at the movie theater and this piano player at the bar. All these smaller slices here are made up of basically everything else. Hospitality, public safety, construction, business owners, pretty much everything you'd expect to be be represented here is represented here, which of course begs the question, how realistic is this makeup of industries for a frontier town in 1907? Honestly, based on my research, it's actually surprisingly close. It wouldn't be at all unrealistic to have over half the town working in agriculture in 1907, and in fact, as of 1910, 35% of the entire US economy was still agriculture, and that includes the huge industrial cities in that average. So over 50% in a more rural area like this would not be surprising at all. The only two things that stand out as potentially odd here would be the entertainment number and the construction number. You'd probably expect entertainment to be a bit lower if this was real life, even including sex workers, and construction you would expect to be a little bit higher. But aside from that, this is a really solid set of representative data. Nice job, Rockstar. The last economic indicator here is going to be wealth distribution. And as we can see, the town of Valentine is dominated by working class folks at about 70%, with middle class people making up 20% and the upper class 10%. Tiny little bit over there for the poor people, but it was really just a couple folks who fit that description. To be honest, the main thing that separated the classes in our survey was just how people were dressed and how dirty they were, which is very shallow of me, but I feel like it worked. And if it's correct, then it shows a town that's not really in horrible shape in terms of wealth inequality. Now, in reality, a frontier town would probably be a little bit poorer than this, with more working class people overall, but it's not super out of the question to have a distribution roughly like this, especially if it was a busy few years for Valentine and they had to, raise wages to draw more workers in or whatever. And then our last survey question overall, how healthy is everyone in Valentine? Well, half of our survey subjects were in fine health according to our scale, about a quarter of them are in poor health, and the last quarter are in good health, which is almost exactly the same as it was when we were just talking about the named NPCs. It's important to note that with this particular question, we are sort of normatively loading the word fine to basically just mean average in this context. So it's sort of a foregone conclusion that most people would be fine, and also that fine in the context of 1907 is probably way, way worse than fine in 2025. But if we want to determine whether this is, realistic in terms of how healthy people were back then, there is one way we can very easily do that, and that's going to be by using their teeth, because that's one thing that we have very solid data on from all the way back in cowboy times. So about 30% of the people we surveyed had one or more teeth completely missing, which seems very high. That seems pretty bad, but it's actually probably significantly lower than it would have been in real life in that era. According to a 1919 congressional report called, this is really what it was called, I didn't name it, okay? They were much ruder back then. Defects found in drafted men. 40% of men who were drafted into the military aged 25 or above were missing at least one tooth, and most scholars of the period agree that missing multiple teeth by the age of 40 would have been extremely common. So if anything, this is actually unrealistic because people have too many teeth in Red Dead Redemption 2. Surprisingly, this means that even down to the hyper-specific details that you would dig up in something like a census, Red Dead Redemption 2 is really a pretty amazing representation of a slice of American history. Obviously, it's video gamified in a lot of ways, but not as much as you might guess in others. And in terms of employment industries, proportions of workers in certain fields, and overall wealth distribution, it's probably about as good as you could hope for, and a whole lot better than you would expect from a video game normally. The only two categories in which things got a little unrealistic are when it comes to age and health. And in fact, those are really the only two big things that would need to be corrected in order for this to be like a really very accurate representation of a frontier town on a census form. You have to put kids in the town. Towns have kids. People who live places have families. That's just like part of what a lot of people want to do. So they would need to add kids. And then the other really big thing that I think they should fix if they ever do a Red Dead Redemption 3, our teeth. These things were just in so much worse shape than Red Dead Redemption 2 makes it seem like they were. This cannot be overstated. They need to go in there and just really fuck up people's teeth. But if they do that, thumbs up for realism. I'm Annie Austin. Thanks for watching.